We are standing at the edge of a 28-year cycle where the very foundations of our world, from global institutions to our personal sense of work, are dissolving into something entirely new. Hey there, Truth Seeker. Welcome to the Star Kittens community where we discuss 13-sign astrology. Are you in alignment with your divine design? Do you want to master the metaphysical reality? Open the doors of perception. Each planetary body is an archetype, a template, if you will, that helps us interpret human behavior and the world around us. The more awake and aware we are, the more synchronicity will show up in your life. Our focus today is the Virgo full moon. The sun and moon are in a T-square with Jupiter, Hades, Kronos, and Sirius. To help us reach more souls with this important message, please like, share, and subscribe. There's a lot going on, so let's jump in. Kia ora, David.
Kia ora.
The sun is still very much sitting in Pisces, and today we are going to talk about the full moon in April. Here in New Zealand, it happens on the 2nd of April at 3:11 p.m. in the afternoon, with the moon sitting at 18 degrees Virgo. So what would you like to share with us about that opposition of this Piscean and Virgo energy?
So we've got the sun in Pisces and the moon in Virgo. So if Virgo for us represents work and well-being, and Pisces represents dissolution and emergence, and we mash those two together to look at the opposition between the two, what it says to me is that something physical is closing. So that's the Virgo earth energy and Pisces representing the end of a cycle. So something physical is coming to an end in terms of our work or our well-being. So we have reached a conclusion in a physical sense. So this is very much pointing to our body, and specifically the time that we spend on working. So we expend productive activity and energy on working. So that's very much in that Virgo space. So there will be questions coming up when you have Virgo Pisces in an opposition like this about the meaning that we derive from work, and also about listening to our body. If we consider that our body is a consciousness in and of itself, a question to ponder or contemplate is, what is our body communicating to us about our work and well-being? The Pisces water energy suggests that something will be washing away, and it could be that work loses meaning, so Virgo work. It could be that our body manifests something and signalling change. But whatever's going on here, we know that very specifically Virgo, because it refers to our work and our well-being, and the reason that we link those two together is often if we feel good at work, we feel good energetically in our lives, but if we don't feel good in our lives, we often struggle to work. So the two are linked. So clearly we're talking about work, well-being, something coming to a head, something closing, something dissolving, and something emerging in its place. And the Pisces energy is washing whatever was away, and we will know shortly, that is when the sun moves into Aries around about the 19th of April, what that something may well be. That will be the end of this particular cycle, or the solar year, as the sun approaches Aries in late April. So when we get to the last sort of phase of a 12-month solar cycle, which is what we're in with the sun, and the energy is focusing on Virgo, it's very much about, there will be some people listening who will be thinking about, that work has lost meaning, or there's something going on in my health that I need to deal with, and that would be very consistent with the end of a cycle, Pisces sun and a Virgo moon.
Thank you. for you listening, just to give you a physical a description of what it actually looks like. So the sun is sitting at 20 degrees Pisces. And if you use one of those star apps and you point it up at the sky now, you'll see very clearly that the sun is sitting in the middle of that beautiful constellation of the two fish. Last time we also spoke about this conjunction, and we are going to highlight it again because I think it's very apt for this end of a solar year. It is this conjunction with Saturn, and Saturn is sitting at 13 degrees Pisces. So end of a cycle. Do you then also see that as an end of a cycle for some of these structures that we have in our lives?
Yeah, absolutely. And let's not forget that Saturn itself is in a conjunction with Neptune, right? Which we talked about. So we talked about that last time. There's a double Piscean energy coming through here from both Neptune being the guardian of Pisces, but also the sign of Pisces as well. So a Sun conjunct Saturn in Pisces and Saturn itself conjunct Neptune in Pisces. This to me brings a focus to, firstly, structured meditation and mindfulness. So how do I arrive at that? Saturn brings structure, and Pisces is very much about going inward and focusing on our inner guidance system. So when you combine Saturn and Pisces with the Sun, but also the Neptune energy there, to me, one of the key things is we need to structure our meditation and mindfulness in a way that allows us to go inwards, to tap into our cosmic intelligence. So this, one of the messages of those particular planetary alignments is to encourage us to engage in some sort of practice so that we can listen to our inner guidance system, which is very important at the end of a cycle. It's so vital that we hear from the stillness within us rather than listening to our busy minds to guide us forward, because as we go through Piscean energy, we're dealing with dissolution and emergence, as we said, and sometimes it can be a little foggy and fuzzy to understand exactly what's going on. However, our spirit knows, our inner spirit knows, and so structured meditation and mindfulness, regular practice. And there's another aspect of this, that lessons that we've been learning, i.e. Saturn, need to now be embedded into our awareness as habits that support vibrant health and meaningful work. And that's where that energy of Virgo on the other side comes in as well. So if you've been, setting some intentions to do things differently, particularly, let's not forget about the Virgo moon on the other side, to do things differently with your health, a health regime, or with work. It's time to embed those habits. That's what Saturn says, is that you master new habits and you embed them, and that's a key thing coming through right now as well. Another aspect of this is to let go of outdated spiritual beliefs, and the need for an intermediary that gets in the way, if you like, or stands between us and our connection with Source or the universal consciousness or God, whatever spirit, whatever name that you use. Saturn represents potentially an intermediary or a leadership type structure, and I think immediately of organized religion there. So when we have Saturn in that context with a Sun conjunction in Pisces and also in the Neptune energy, it is about understanding that some of our outdated spiritual beliefs are on the table, and maybe they need to be dissolved and let go of as well. As I said before, this is the end of a lunar cycle that began almost 12 months ago when the Sun goes into Aries. It begins a 12-month lunar cycle, so we're almost at the end of that. And this could be quite intense, some of these energies, right through to about the 19th of April, when the Sun finally emerges from Pisces and moves into Aries. On a collective level, though, there could be a surfacing or coming into our collective awareness of old structures that must be dissolved through conscious awareness. Saturn's rules and regulations and dominance and suppression need to be reviewed and renewed under the Piscean energy. the old is coming apart, and it is coming visible to us, or those who want to see, so that we can draw on some insights that prepare us for the new lunar cycle starting on the 19th of April 2026. There is also the idea of when Saturn is conjunct to Neptune. We touched on this last time, but I'll touch on it again, and also with the amplification of the Sun energy here as well, also in Pisces, is that many are talking about the collapse of a 3D reality. If we consider that Saturn represents 3D reality, the physical world, the peak of the physical world, then we might consider that under this Piscean energy that the 3D structures of religious control and so on are beginning to melt away. Now, I wouldn't normally do this, but I also wanted to capture something. We're going to go back and look at what we talked about for the February 28, 2025 Aquarius new moon, where we spent a lot of time talking about Saturn's structures and institutions. And I think that so this blog is available on YouTube, and I encourage those who want to go back and listen to it. But I'm just going to pull out a few pieces about what we talked about when we spent a lot of focus, a lot of time talking about Saturn and what it actually means in Pisces. And I wanted to just reinforce that now. So this was from our February 28, 2025 blog. In the opening statement, we said there that Tony Robbins says the fourth turning offers bold predictions about how all of us can prepare individually and collectively for humanity's next rendezvous with destiny. Spiritually, the age of Aquarius has long been the anthem for such profound change. And of course, the Hindus have for centuries talked about the impending transition from the dark age of Kali Yuga, which is often associated with Saturn, to the light age of Satya Yuga, where virtues, values and ethical living are mandatory. So we're going through this phase transition. When Saturn is in Pisces, we're going through a transition, in this case from the dark age of Kali Yuga to the light age of Satya Yuga. In that discussion or blog of 28th of February 2025, we laid out the timings and markers using astrological signals of when and how the age of Aquarius and the fourth turning will begin. Why am I referencing age of Aquarius? Because Saturn in Pisces represents the old world. We've heard of the age of Pisces, the command and control structures of Saturn. Of course, what comes on the other side of that is the age of Aquarius. So that's where we are referring to that. And we're also, when I looked at the fourth turning, it looks very much to me like the stars, the cosmic intelligence is actually confirming that that's what's happening too. So how do we embrace the unstoppable changes that are on the horizon? To do so, we need to understand a little bit more about what Pisces and Saturn actually represents in terms of institutions dissolving. Institutions are the rules and norms that organize society, including its political, economic and social relations. They can be formal or informal, and they can be established by laws, regulations or customs. They exist because, one, we humanity give them power, so we give the Saturnian energy power, and two, because that Saturnian energy takes from us and usurps power from humanity. So what are the features of institutions that we talked about back in February 2025? These institutions with these Saturnian structures, they shape behaviour. Institutions influence how we behave and make decisions. Institutions or Saturnian structures provide us with a predictable framework for social, economic and political interactions. They change over time. Institutions can change incrementally or suddenly, and they are constantly being reformed or need to be reformed. And certainly Saturn going through Pisces is about reformation of these institutions and structures, these 3D structures, if you like. But we have to recognize that they can be difficult to change. Institutionalized behaviors or embedded behaviors, both individually and collectively, represented by the rigidity of Saturn, can be difficult to change at both an individual and collective level. And when Saturn is in Pisces, this can have positive or negative outcomes for us individually and collectively. The ripple effects of institutions collapsing really depends on the behaviours that they encourage in the communities that they serve and the relationships that they enable. In February last year, when we were speaking about this, Saturn and Pisces, we talked about some examples of institutions, just to give us an idea of what we're dealing with here. Institutions can be formal, for example, they can be laws that grant us property rights. They can be informal, such as communal systems of land tenure. They can be marriage, for example, as an institution, a long-standing custom and tradition that is accepted as an important part of many societies. They can also manifest as organisations, foundations, think tanks, non-government organisations, academic structures, religious structures, corporations. All of these institutions create a framework for us that manage production, consumption, communication and exchange. And so I'll just touch on a couple of other things. I'm diving into this because we need to understand that this is a profound time that we're going through, not just represented by this full moon, or this, it's a new moon? Full moon, but also by the fact that Saturn is grinding its way through Pisces. And Saturn right now is conjunct to Neptune. So there is an enormous amount of institutional and structural change that as a collective, whether we like it or not, is going to happen. The term institution, as we said in February 2025, is used in many disciplines. It includes sociology, philosophy, politics, geography, and economics. So it has a wide and diverse impact on all of us. Saturn is the archetype of institutions. Examples of those institutions include governments, the EU, Bretton Woods, the WHO, the UN, the World Bank, IMF, Wall Street, Washington DC, the Catholic Church, nation states, the courts, Hollywood, international trade, the Versailles Treaty, the Plaza Accords, the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Climate Agreement, NATO, healthcare, education, pension plans, the military-industrial complex. You can go on and on and on, but I'm hitting a whole lot of these because these are the structures that we see around us collapsing under a Pisces energy, and obviously amplified under this lunation as well. These Saturnian institutions in Pisces, this is the representation of a 28-year cycle that began, therefore, when Saturn first entered Pisces. That cycle began around about the year 2000, which interestingly was the turn of the millennium. That 2000 to 2028, which is this current Pisces cycle, which is going to conclude in March 2028, so it's not far away, is going to bring to a conclusion a 28-year period that began in the year 2000. But what that represents between now and March 2028, when the Saturn finally leaves Pisces, is that we are going to see the peak of matter and materialism for humanity. Under Pisces energy, from what was then in March 2025 a blood moon through to March 2028, his 28-year cycle through Pisces, the hyper-masculinity of all of those control structures that I was touching on before and others will dissolve and disintegrate as they are no longer suited to the evolution of humanity's mindset and orientation towards spiritual practice. To be clear, spiritual practice in this context means the involvement of and integration of spirit into our institutions so that they become more customer and service oriented as opposed to self-serving. They become collaborative, inclusive, welcoming, supportive, consensus-based, and, to be honest, more feminine. Pisces represents the collective unconsciousness, and Aquarius the collective consciousness, remembering that Aquarius, or the sign or age of Aquarius, is an air sign, so therefore it is of the mind, whereas Pisces is unconscious and therefore of the intuition. So Pisces represents the collective unconsciousness, whereas Aquarius represents the collective consciousness. That's what we call the cognitive map of Saturn's control structures. This is how Pisces and Aquarius and Saturn as the Lord of time and karmic cycles correspond to evolutionary change from matter to spirit. For humanity to evolve from matter to spirit, as Richard Rudd talks about with Gene Key 55, and Theosophy talks about with the root race concept that refers to successive evolutionary stages through which humanity goes in its pilgrimage on the physical plane, we need to move from victimization to freedom. Root race theories and prophecies, which are well documented, go back to Madame Blavatsky in 1888 and before that to the Vedic sages, and they are based on genetic mutations or activation of multiple strands of DNA within our genome. We think that genetic upgrades are linked to Uranian awakenings and astrological transitions, such as what we're talking about at the moment, which means that like lightning, these transitions and awakenings come quickly and without warning. So, for humanity to prepare for an evolutionary leap from matter of Saturn to spirit of Pisces, we need to recognize that these Saturnian institutions have inflicted enormous pain on the collective because we gave them the power to do so. We surrendered our sovereignty and autonomy to faceless bureaucracies and unelected officials to think and decide what's best for the collective. Consequently, we have forgotten both individually and collectively how to think, and we have lost our confidence and our mojo, so to speak, and we have become disempowered. Saturnian institutions have engendered a massive grievance industry that seeks retribution and restitution for past wrongs. In other words, in spiritual terms, karmic rebalancing. For humanity to evolve from matter of Saturn to spirit, for the timelines to shift, we need to tackle the unconscious effects of deleterious, overbearing institutions and confront our collective pain, symbolized by and contained within the Pisces energetics. We do this by recognizing the limitations and lunacy of our collective thinking. Then and only then, after the collapse of institutions, can we seed a new vision for humanity. So that was what we talked about in our February 28, 2025 Aquarius New Moon blog, but I think it was worthwhile revisiting here today at this lunation.
Yes, it's good to get to hear that again, and how stuck in some ways we are, how much power we have given away to almost every aspect of our lives. And if you are interested in spiritual teachings or opening up your intuition, whether you do that by meditation or listening to people like Lisa Renee, we are so much more than this physical body that most of us only see. Yes, there are people that are able to see the auric body or even other bodies that are around us, but we definitely are a spirit having a human experience. And to hear that, it's almost like you have to hear that every day to start living that more and more. So we are also going to talk about a different aspect that the sun and the moon are making. So if we think about a geometric shape of the triangle, we've got the sun on one side, the moon on the other side, so they're sitting down the bottom, and they're making this triangle to Jupiter in Gemini. So let's start with that one first. Jupiter is sitting at 15 degrees Gemini.
Yep, so that means that Jupiter is at the apex or top of that triangle T-square. And we need to also, as I go through this quickly, just remember that Jupiter is also itself conjunct with Kronos, Hades, and the star Sirius. So we're going to talk about all of that wrapped up together in this lunation. So the first thing that came to mind when I was reflecting on this was timeline split. And Kronos represents, or Saturn also. So Kronos and Saturn are octaves of the same energy. And the archetype of Kronos and the archetype of Saturn are the same deity, but given through different lenses from the Greco and the Roman perspectives. And often when looking at astrology, we need to be mindful of the stories that have been told, often for hundreds or thousands of years, about these deities and what they represent, because that is how human consciousness is able to tap into that reality and then look at it as a story and unpack it. So Kronos and Saturn are the Greek and Roman versions of the same deity. But what we know about Saturn and Kronos is that it represents time. It has many other representations, but one of the representations is time. And the Jupiter conjunct Hades, which is also part of this T-square, Hades represents is an octave or the flip side of Pluto. So the same story again. We have Hades and Pluto, Greco-Roman, two different myths, but they're talking about the same deity. But we know that Hades or Pluto represents death, the passing away. So we have time, Kronos and Saturn, and we have Hades, death of time, and we have the energies of Saturn conjunct Neptune in Pisces. So immediately I see the cosmic intelligence confirming absolutely unequivocally for us that are looking. There will be signs in the sky for those that are looking and interpreting this T-square from the Sun and Moon to Jupiter in Gemini, conjunct Kronos, Hades and the star Sirius, confirms a timeline split is imminent and underway. Hades and Saturn are dissolving. They are the masters or lords of time, and they are dissolving in the Neptunian and Pisces energy. Jupiter represents therefore an expansion of our conscious awareness of this process. And the activation, because Gemini represents the left brain, analytical, masculine intelligence, this is an activation of our intellect and a supercharging of our left brain logic and analytical mind, and that side of our reality, our consciousness. Of course, the other side of our consciousness is our intuition. Intelligence, masculine, intuition, feminine. Jupiter is lighting up that masculine superintelligence, the logic, the critical thinking, the reasoning faculties that we have. And I talked before about with Saturn that we've given away our power, we've stopped thinking. This is why we think that it's okay for big organizations to think on our behalf. Well, we need to start thinking for ourselves, and this Jupiter energy here in Gemini is asking us and reminding us, in the context of a timeline split, in the context of Saturn's institutions and structures dissolving, we need to be thinking our way through this as well as intuiting our way through it. So the supercharging of our left brain logic, and it's going to bring Jupiter, which amplifies, is going to bring to our awareness this discussion, this key discussion or argument of sovereignty, self-sovereignty, which is the positive side of Saturn, by the way. Saturn is mastery over self as much as mastery over our past. So when we learn these lessons, when we develop Saturn's patience and tolerance and understanding, we get mastery over self, and that allows us to be more sovereign in the way that we approach life. So the issue of sovereignty versus disempowerment will be really strongly aspected here and will come into consciousness. Kronos, the flip side of Kronos, of dominant leadership, also means personal leadership. If Kronos and Saturn represent leadership in both ways, both the positive and negative aspects of leadership. But the star Sirius energy here, which we've very rarely touched on, but this is so clearly coming out right now that I'm going to do just a quick analysis of that as well, or interpretation. To me, the star Sirius represents the spiritual science. In Sirius, many have heard of Arcturus as a fixed star, but another key is Sirius. And I touched before on the root races, that if we believe that humanity was seeded by benevolent off-planet species, that one of those off-planet species that contributed to our genetic structure, and therefore that's part of the root race ideas, is Sirius. Another one is Arcturus, and there are others as well, but we're talking about Sirius. So to me, Sirius is the spiritual science. The key to Sirius, and remember we're talking about an amplification of this with Jupiter in Gemini, which is thinking and analysis. Spiritual science in this context of a timeline split. If you are inclined or want to focus on meditation and mindfulness, or contemplating the Sirian energy and bringing it through, you are going to understand a lot about the multi-dimensional realities that we live in and operate in, including the metaphysical, the etherical realms, the genetic inheritance that we have, the power of our DNA structures. Sirius provides a understanding from quite a technical perspective of what it means to be a spirit having a human experience, because the knowledge that comes from that star system takes you into the operating system of your genetics and of light and sound. And it takes you almost back to the beginning of the process of how does manifestation truly happen. In the Sirian perspective, star Sirius, they believe that light and sound are the two keys, consciousness being the third part, but light and sound are the two keys to physical manifestation, which is, of course, Saturn represents. So if we are being given the opportunity, for those who are inclined, to examine our operating system, if you like, the source code of human, of our DNA and our genetics and our genome and the structure that we actually have, if we believe that we are spirit that's inhabiting a physical human body, but that physical human body is only one representation of who we are, and you touched on that before, that there are people out there who can see your aura. So what are they seeing? They're not seeing your physical body, they're seeing an energy around you. While in the Sirian view, there are multiple energies, and we operate in multiple dimensions. And this idea, there are different pieces to this, but we know that people like Joe Dispenza and various others are talking about, his friend Bruce Lipton talks about epigenetics, which is where you use consciousness to change gene expression. And he talks about that very much from a scientific point of view. So there's clearly an opportunity to influence our reality beyond the physical, and part of that is tapping into the star Sirius archetype and energy or consciousness. So this is the mechanics of, as I say, a spirit having a human experience. The Sirius Kronos Hades conjunction, those who are vibrating at the corresponding frequency of those three together, being amplified by Jupiter in Gemini, and who are focused on and aware of a timeline bifurcation. If that doesn't resonate for you, that's okay. But for those who are vibrating at that level or that frequency, to experience a timeline bifurcation and a release from the matrix or the phantom shadow worlds or the artificial construct that we are living in, this is the time that it's going to become very clear to you what the pathway is to move out of and take your sovereignty back, and to drop into your divine design and what it was that we came here to this planet to do in the first place. There are people who are going to be activated under this energy of the Sirian energy, conjunct with Kronos, which represents, leadership or new type of leadership, and Hades, which represents death or passing. So we have this opportunity to consciously connect with our starseed lineages and our inner template, if you like, our divine design template, what we call our divine design. And all of this is being stirred up and activated right now. So it's no surprise to me at all that when you go to YouTube or various other podcast platforms, you'll find plenty of people talking about dimensional time splits, 3D to 5D. There's various phrasings and contexts that are given for this. I was watching something that just popped up before on my my Instagram about this very thing. So this is happening in the consciousness, and this to me is a reflection and a representation of Pisces having its influence on the Saturnian physical structures. So Kronos and Saturn, I touched on some of those institutions of power and force before: politics, governance, healthcare, education, finance, insurance, organized religion, what many call the rules-based order. All of those monoliths of control, those pyramid structures of dominance are being dissolved. They are being reoriented. They are being I was using the word before, we were in the supermarket and I was laughing because we normally buy a certain type of bread and we didn't do it, and I was so used to and in the habit of buying that bread, I said that I was discombobulated. Well, that feeling of feeling discombobulated is certainly something that we can experience on the other side of these Saturnian structures collapsing. But if we want to go into the inner workings of that on a metaphysical level and on a deep, deep level, you can tap into the Sirian energy is the message here. So the foundations of power have been eroded. We're seeing an upending of institutional power in Saturn and Kronos, but we're also seeing this metaphysical energy weaving its way through there with the Sirian energy and the Pisces energy and the Neptune energy as well. So I call this cross currents. There are multiple layers of reality here that we're dealing with. When Saturnian structures or Kronos structures or monoliths of control pyramid structures dissolve, what we're experiencing on an individual and collective level is a reorientation of our reality. And that means we can become unanchored and we can be caught up in quite a whirlwind of change. But there is absolutely no doubt that there's evolution and progress taking place and we can't really stop it. One other thing about Saturn and Kronos being activated here with the timeline reordering is that in order to rehabilitate and clean out some of our cosmic drama that is contained in the unconsciousness of Pisces, so this is collective pain, we need to have that collective pain presented to us or manifested to us through manifestation of timelines such as the end time prophecies, which is what we're seeing right now playing out. That to me is actually what happens. You can't clear that through Pisces. So that Saturnian idea of those end time prophecies, that's a time ordered timeline represented by Kronos and Saturn that is presenting itself right now for us as a collective to confront and deal with and dissolve. We can't do it if we shy away from it. So humanity has been asked to look at that, the whole piece of the Saturnian structures, particularly of organized religion and end times prophecies, which are very much set in timelines. These timelines are being brought to the surface and dissolved. It's very difficult for many to understand this, but this is the Sirian energy that's flowing through here and the higher frequency vibrations of Pisces as well. So it's asking us, Jupiter is saying, when it's in Gemini, we need to think about this. We need to engage our left brain and our analytical skills. We need to be willing to critically think about these things. We can't just feel our way through. We need to think about it as well. We have two sides to our brain. We have both a thinking and a feeling, but we also have our intuition. So all of these faculties need to be activated in order for us to make sense. If we don't, then we can feel very disoriented, discombobulated, as I said, as these structures are upended, and we can be caught up in potentially a feeling of just utter bewilderment, like what is going on, and disorientation, and even mass psychosis, fear and delusion. And I think those things are absolutely happening. There's no doubt with the Saturn and Kronos representing time that we're at a pivot point, a juncture, an inflection where reality will shift and change, and it will morph into something new. And the timing of that astrologically is clear. The first signs of this we will see is when the sun goes into Aries, excuse me, on the 19th of April this year. It's a new whole 12-month cycle. So there's a backwash of stuff that's building up now that will be presented in April this year, where we will need to act upon. It's almost like life is shaking out a whole bunch of stuff for us around these institutions, and we're going to see the pieces on the ground, and we're going to, some of us are going to have to pick them up and run with them, because that's what the Aries energy is, action. But the other side of this, the other timer that we know, is that when Saturn itself moves finally out of Pisces, that is March 2027. So we've got 2026, the sun moves into Aries, and then we've got, is it 2027 or is it 28? No, it's 28, beg your pardon, 2028. So this cycle, this Saturn cycle, as I mentioned before, is really going to ramp up between now and March 2028. It's going to get very, very intense as these institutions collapse, morph, change, become unanchored. So the antidote to all of this is to ground in Mother Earth, that's the Virgo energy, is to develop deep practice in meditation and mindfulness, that's the Pisces message, is to think this through, which is the Jupiter and Gemini message, so that we can take care of our physical body, because we are going to be fried, some of us. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, because this is so profound. This process of the Saturn structures collapsing began, remember, in the year 2000. And we're in the last piece of it between now and March 2028. Self-love, Virgo, work with meaning and purpose. Find something to do that gives you meaning and purpose, because that will help you to ground. It's going to get wild. Buckle up and open your eyes and get on the train of what's happening. And boy, we're going to come through something in the next 12, 18 months, 2 years that's just going to be absolutely incredible.
And we chose to be here at this time, having this human experience. I just ran the chart. It looks like it will be around the 10th, 11th, 12th of April 2028 that Saturn is making that transition from Pisces to Aries. Can't wait.
Very interesting too that for most in the Western world coincides with that whole Easter period.
Yeah.
Which again, I mean, there's so many layers to this. But if we think about one of the timelines that's being presented to us that needs to be revised, regenerated, rethought, recalibrated. One of them is the religious ideas of death, rebirth. You know, that whole story of Christianity is Christ dying on the cross for our sins, and many people follow that. And you know, that has been the Saturnian institution of that for many. And I don't want to offend people, but there are many who rely on, you know, you and I will just talk to source directly. We don't need to go, and that can be anytime, anywhere. We don't need to go to a structured building and sit in a cathedral and sing from a hymn book. We just connect. But for others, their experience of Saturn's structure in terms of religion is precisely what I'm saying, is every Sunday you go and you do a service. So I find it fascinating that timing that you're giving there is that April, Easter period, when actually most of the Western world slows down. Markets close, governments close, schools close, people go on holiday, people reflect, people spend time reflecting on something other than the busy world. That's what it's supposed to be. And in the middle of all of that, for those who are following the astrological, the 13th sign, that's when all sorts is going to kick off a brand new 28-year cycle. And it's not going to be the same as the last, if we think about 2000 to 2028 and all of the institutions that have been built and have manifested and have just, as I said, this is the peak of physical manifestation. This is it. We're in it right now. And when you look around the world, you can see a lot of these systems are just absolutely falling apart.
Yeah, and it's so important for us as well to stay creative, to whether that is cooking and baking from scratch, whether that is grabbing your knitting or crochet yarn, whether it is painting or making Excel spreadsheets. It is creating. We have to create, because that's what just brings a lot more light to the planet. And have no mistake of how much your positivity, how much of an impact that has to that everything that is around us. So with that, if you are intrigued to see what your divine design for this lifetime has in store for you, you can hit us up for a chat. The last few readings that we've done, the feedback has been so profound, and if you are able to step into that part of your life, to get to know what your divine design is, how your true planetary positions at your birth, how much that can influence you right now, we would love to do a reading for you. Listen to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, all of them. And I look forward to seeing you for the next one. Ngā mihi.
Namaste.
Until then.